MCU fans, welcome back to my channel. This is Those Who Do Movie Reviews. My name is Olga, and today I'm going to review one of my most anticipated movies of the year, definitely in my list of my most anticipated, and that is Black Widow. This is the new film from the MCU, and this movie stars Scarlett Johansson, Florence, Pugh, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz. Basically, Black Widow took place between Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. Natasha Romanoff, after the events of Civil War, she's running away from the government. She's now a fugitive. And she is reunited with her past to stop this organization that she trained in, Red Room. Finally, we got a Black Widow movie. We've been waiting for a Black Widow movie probably ever since Iron Man 2. We've been waiting to see Natasha Romanoff's character in her own solo movie. I've been waiting for all those years, and now, after the events of Avengers Endgame, which, spoiler, if you have not seen Avengers Endgame, you've been warned, unfortunately, Black Widow passed away. So, this is basically the last movie that we get to see Scarlett Johansson in this role as Black Widow. I always think this is the weirdest timing to release a solid Black Widow movie after she died in Endgame, but still, whenever there is an MCU film, I'm always excited. We finally get to see her in a solo movie. We've been waiting for so long to see a Black Widow solo movie. So, what do I think of Black Widow? Of course, this is going to be a spoiler-free review. Let's start talking about things I liked about Black Widow. Spoiler-free, of course. First off, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow in this movie. She is fantastic in this film. I think it's probably the best Black Widow that I've ever seen in the MCU. Especially that this is going to be the final betrayal by Scarlett Johansson as Natasha Romanoff, since now she died in Endgame, she's not going to be around anymore. So this is basically her last betrayal as Black Widow, and she did a really great job in the film. But I think the thing that Black Widow does really, really well is introducing the new characters that's going to appear in future films in the MCU. David Harbour as Red Guardian. His character in this movie really stood out. I loved his character. I thought he has a lot of charisma to him. And it's a role that I feel like, yes, no one can play this role except for David Harbour. I think David Harbour was hilarious, he had charisma, and his character was the most interesting. And I honestly, after this movie, I wanted to see his own solo film or Disney Plus series, even better. I think David Harbour does a really good performance in this film. But this whole film, in my opinion, is Florence Pugh's movie. Florence Pugh in this film was fantastic. I loved her in this film. This is definitely, in my opinion, more of her movie than a Black Widow movie. In a good way. Like, I feel like she stole the show more than the main character of the film. She has great characteristics. You get her character throughout the whole story. And I think the thing that stood out is the chemistry between Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh in the film. It adds a lot of heart to this film, and I really loved them two together. It brings a lot of comedy, but also it brings a lot of heart to their characters as well, because it's the most important part of the story. Also, Rachel Weisz was really good in the film. I wouldn't say she's a character that stood out, but she is pretty good in the movie. I think her performance is really good in the film, but the whole family in this film together really made this film at least worth watching. The action scenes are still pretty fun. I do think the action scenes have some pretty cool aspects to it, and I love the entire tone of Black Widow. Obviously, it's trying to go in the tone of Captain America the Winter Soldier, but I see this movie more as a spy thriller. I can see this movie looking like a Bourne movie, and I really did like the tone and the look of this entire freaking movie. But guys, that is it for the positives of the film, because my overall thoughts on Black Widow, I was honestly a bit disappointed. It's not a terrible movie, it's not a great movie. It's a movie that's basically in the middle. There are some good things in Black Widow, and there are some bad things. But in my opinion, I would say Black Widow is one of the most disappointing movies that I have seen this year. I would say this movie has a lot of missed opportunities they could have explored more in this film. There are moments where Natasha Romanoff refers to her past, and the opening of this movie refers to her past. And I felt like that moment, I'm like, okay, that's the film I wanted to see. The opening of this film was actually probably some of the best openings I've seen for a solo MCU film. But that was just the opening, with the opening credits, and then it moves on to a revenge plot, and I felt like they could have just explored more of her backstory a lot more, and that's kind of what we wanted to see, of how Natasha Romanoff became this character. And the story of this film, honestly, it's a story that we've seen many times before. You know, like a person that's getting revenge on someone that changes this character. We've seen stories like this many times before, and even this movie follows the exact same tropes that we've seen in most MCU films. I honestly would love to see an MCU film that is basically different. Like, I always find WandaVision, except for the final episode, throughout the season, throughout the TV series, I find it so original and different. I'm like, this is what we needed now in the MCU. We needed something different. Not following too much of the same tropes that we've seen. That's just my feeling with Black Widow. It just felt no surprises, no differences. There's nothing that blew me away or anything. And that's very disappointing because this is a movie that everyone's been waiting for. And since this movie just felt like a generic MCU film. And I love MCU films, don't get me wrong, but I really didn't like if the movie just repeats itself all over again. And speaking of traits that every MCU film has, obviously the villain in Black Widow was just completely forgettable. We got the Taskmaster in this film, which I was honestly really excited to see him in the film. Because all I know is about Taskmaster is that he can mimic every single move that each hero has. And I'm like, that is cool. I love that ability. I find that ability really, really cool in the film. But honestly, Taskmaster just felt like, in my personal opinion, kind of like what Deadpool is in X-Men Origins Wolverine. He's just there to be the bad guy. There's no arc for Taskmaster in the film. We do get some backstory, but honestly, it just felt like Taskmaster is just there to be a side villain for the main villain of the film, which I'm not going to spoil who the main villain is. And I felt like they completely ruined the character of Taskmaster. Like, the first time I saw Taskmaster, he was in the PS4 version of Spider-Man. And I find his character really, really cool, and I read the information about Taskmaster, and I think he's a really cool character, and this movie kind of ruined him, in my opinion. And honestly, this movie was way too long than it actually is. There are some parts in Black Widow that did drag on, in my opinion. There are parts in Black Widow that it kind of bored me for a little bit. Because, as I said, it just follows the exact same tropes that we've seen in most MCU films. You know, a character that's after this bad guy, and that is it. It's entertaining, but there are parts in the movie where I'm just like, I knew what's coming, I know this is coming, and all that stuff. But that is just my personal negatives with Black Widow. I do think Black Widow should have been much better than it actually is. I feel like the story of the film could have been much better. I feel like there are some missed opportunities that it could have explored with Black Widow. But at the same time, it's still worth a watch. I think it's a good finale for Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. I think the new characters really stood out, especially Florence, Pugh, and David Harbour. I want to see them back in the MCU. And the action scenes were actually pretty good in the film. Even though there are a lot of moments where I'm just thinking to myself, Black Widow could have died from this. Because, you know, Black Widow doesn't have any powers. And it makes sense why Thor and Captain America and Hulk survives a lot of stuff because they have powers. But Black Widow at times, like, gets hit in poles. Like, she falls off a building and hits, like, poles and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, she could have at least broken her back or at least be unconscious. But other than that, the action scenes were really good. I do think if you're a huge MCU fans, I think you will like Black Widow. I know some people love Black Widow. In my opinion, I feel like this film should have been so much better than it actually is. But still, it's fine. I'm going to give Black Widow a C. Finally, I've reviewed Black Widow. I know this is a late review. I'm probably the only person who hasn't reviewed Black Widow yet. Finally, I have reviewed Black Widow. Let me know what you guys think of Black Widow. Have you seen this movie? Do you like this movie? Hate this movie? And what is your favorite MCU film? Just let me know in the comments below. Make sure you guys follow me on social media links down below. Facebook, Stardust, Instagram, Twitter, or Letterboxd. Keep contact with me. And make sure you guys subscribe to my channel and notify for my latest movie reviews and other movie related content. And have a nice day.